そのレベル0のあんたがなんで傷一つないのかしら。
なんていうか不幸っつうかついてねえよな。お前本当についてねえよ。
Hello and welcome to a critique of a certain magical index, a story about an unfortunate guy with a mysterious power confronting the worlds of magic and science and facing the corruption within. To begin my analysis, I will give a little background on Index and then briefly talk about what you can expect from this series. So, originally a light novel series, Index was given its first anime adaptation back in 2008, with its high-quality animation backed by impressive character designs, to the supernatural powers and magic strongly tied into real-world science and religion, topped off with the City of Education hiding a much darker and corrupt undertone. It's not surprising that it garnered a solid following that has so far resulted in 2 sequel seasons and 4 side stories, totaling 7 seasons and 157 episodes. They even have a movie, and not one of those dumb recap movies, an actual movie, you know, with like its own story and stuff. There's certainly a lot on offer, and when I first watched it I really enjoyed it. But after having thought about it for some time and with subsequent rewatches, my opinion started to sour. I still like the show, but I've become frustrated with it. Index has a lot of pieces on the board, but they don't always fit together too well. There's plenty of reasons as to why this is the case, and I found I was keen to talk about them, so that led to the creation of this series. The way this is going to work is that we'll go through the episodes one by one, but before we start, there are a couple of quick things I need to address. The first is that Index Season 1 has 2 common subtitle versions. The easiest way to distinguish between them is Toma's catchphrase. The version currently on Crunchyroll has his catchphrase as "just my luck," whereas the wiki uses subtitles that have his catchphrase as "such misfortune." Now, no subtitle version will ever be 100% accurate, so I will use the "such misfortune" ones as they seem to be the more popular. However, if at times the translation seems a little rough, I will bring in the "just my luck" ones to see if the problem is actually the translation, rather than the dialogue itself. A clear example of this is in episode 4 when the "such misfortune" version has the line, "How badly did you chase her to make her lose even her memories?" Which is not only clunky, it's complete and utter nonsense. The "just my luck" version changes this line to "How badly did you hound her to make something like that happen?" which is much cleaner and paints the dialogue in a better light. Another thing to note is that I will hardly, if ever, reference the light novel series, as the anime adaptation must be able to stand on its own, and not require further information to make it a coherent story. The last thing we'll look at before we begin is that if you go onto my anime list and look at the ratings for each season of Index, you'll notice that each individual season of Railgun is rated higher than each individual season of Index. And although I don't agree with the numbers themselves, I do agree that Railgun is better than Index. But as with many other topics, it will take some time to uncover the reasons why and build towards that conclusion. So with lots to talk about, let's start at the very beginning of episode 1. We open with a shot of a satellite as it zooms in and focuses on Toma running away from a group of thugs. Toma explains who he is and how he got into this situation. He went into a diner, saw a girl being harassed and stepped in to help, then chased after him instead. Once he's escaped, the girl from before approaches him. She is Makoto Misaka, one of only 7 level 5s in Academy City, and we're given our first look at abilities and powers as she shows off her railgun and electrical prowess. But Toma is able to negate the lightning with his Imagine Breaker. The scene ends with Makoto becoming frustrated and launching a massive lightning strike. We'll stop there and go through the opening in more detail. First up, the world of Index has 2 sides to it, that being the magic side and the science side. The science side focuses on education and the development of advanced technology, so the shot of the satellite is an effective way at hinting at which side the city itself lies on. It's also a direct declaration that everything that happens during the nighttime scene will involve science, not magic. The sun rising at the end is the visual shift into the magic side, and it's then that Index arrives. The 2 sides will intersect at times, but they are mainly separate, and this is a great way of beginning to show this. We then meet Toma and he mentions how he is incredibly unlucky. Luck is intrinsically tied to our main character. It's the first and last thing he talks about in the opening. This means that luck is going to be a major talking point of my series. There will be plenty of times where we will look at the events surrounding Toma, determine whether they are cases of good or bad luck, and discuss the ramifications of this. Part of that will involve looking at Toma's intentions and the choices he makes, since his goals will be an important factor of which way the luck falls. So Toma enters the diner with the intention of helping the thug. He's met Makoto in the past and seen the power she's capable of, and so understands that despite how things may look on the surface, she certainly isn't the one in danger. It's important to note as well that originally when he stepped in to help, he thought that there was only one, but that number quickly turned into 8. That's still not enough to threaten Makoto, but 1 is enough to challenge Toma, so he has no chance against a group of them. His approach to try and break this up is pretty reasonable. You could make the case he should have warned them about the danger by telling them she is the railgun, but that might have actually encouraged them to try their luck. In Academy City, many level 0s have grudges against espers, and she does just look like a normal girl who is badly outnumbered. There's also a lot of prestige on offer if they manage to beat one of the best. The other possibility, of course, is that they just don't believe him anyway. The result of Toma's intentions is he ends up getting attacked by the thugs. And yet, his ordeal doesn't end there as he's also confronted by Makoto, meaning he faces the ire of both parties involved. Now, as I said, Makoto and Toma have met each other before. We see this encounter in the first season of Railgun during a flashback. The circumstances of their meeting were similar. Thugs were bothering Makoto and Toma stepped in. But back then, he was unaware of Makoto's abilities and thought she needed help. He tried to play it as though they knew each other, but Makoto didn't care to bite. So he switched into trying to downplay Makoto's value by insulting her a few times. This only ended up pissing her off and she electrocuted all of them except for Toma, unable to because of his Imagine Breaker. Their first meeting helps us to understand the full context of their second. When looking at both, Makoto's behavior isn't great. She's arrogant and aggressive, and as a result, Toma ends up getting a pretty rough deal. In the first meeting, Toma risked a lot to help her because she thought she needed it, and Makoto tried to electrocute him over a couple of insults, even though those insults were used to help get her out of what he thought was a perilous situation, so almost getting fried over it is exceedingly harsh. So with that context, we can look at our current scene, and it doesn't get much better for Toma. She continues this arrogant attitude towards him, flexing her railgun and talking down to him throughout. There's no reason for her to even approach him now that everything is taken care of. They could just go their separate ways. But she is determined to have them fight, something that Toma has no interest in. So Makoto's behavior is not great. And what tips the scale of bad luck further against Toma is that it's very uncharacteristic of her. Now, it's no secret that she behaves differently with Toma than she does with everybody else, particularly as she starts to recognize her feelings for him. But they're strangers at this point, and all he's tried to do was help. I can prove this by looking at her behavior when she meets Saten and Uriharu for the first time. Going into it, Saten expected this kind of behavior from her. She herself is a level 0 and thought that because of this, Makoto would look down on her and behave all high and mighty. But they were both surprised with how that wasn't the case at all. They found it was actually really easy to get along with her. There are many other cases throughout the show of her being kind and caring to the people around her. Makoto even becomes quite embarrassed when people bring up how she's the ace of Tokyo or Die and one of the level 5 espers. Who she is more important than both the title and power she carries. Another weird part of Makoto's behavior is how willing she is to deter a stranger from stepping in to help someone in need. She's smart enough to know that although she is fine in this situation, there are plenty of people who would be in trouble under similar circumstances. So purposely and aggressively deterring someone from stepping in isn't something she would want to encourage. Adding all that together, we can give bad luck the points. Toma tried to assist and copped it from both sides in a way that felt very slanted against him. The next thing we're going to talk about is one of the lines of dialogue during this scene. And it's when Toma mentions to Makoto that he is well aware that she is one of 7 level 5s of Academy City. With the added context of knowing they have met and that Toma has seen Makoto's power, the line becomes kinda weird. I'll put my hand up and admit that because of it, I thought they'd never met. It's information that he knows Makoto knows. Makoto is aware that Toma has seen her incredible power, so it's weird for him to mention this to her. Speaking of powers, the bridge gives us our first introduction to some of the abilities we can expect from the show. Makoto's railgun and lightning have real-world science attached to them. The railgun uses Fleming's kinetic momentum to fire objects at high speeds, and the lightning is a manipulation of bioelectricity. Toma's ability, however, is a bit more mysterious. He disperses the lightning upon touch, and at least right now there's no indication of the source of this power, or how exactly the ability works. There's one last little footnote to mention before we move on. This interaction happens on a bridge in the middle of a city, yet no one sees it or cares about it even though the lightning is so powerful. The next day, Toma is dealing with further repercussions of trying to diffuse last night's tension. It's a hot day and Makoto's lightning fried the power to his apartment. With his fridge now dead, all of his reserve food has been lost and he's forced to throw it away. He then steps on his credit card and gets a phone call informing him that he must take extra lessons due to his poor marks. He ends this little montage with his familiar catchphrase.
不幸だ.
The loss of food and electricity work well with Toma's bad luck. Watching someone try to help and having it backfire can have us feeling sorry for a character. But the credit card and performance at school start to raise concerns about how much responsibility Toma places on his own actions. It seems like he may not be willing to take any blame for what is happening around him. Still, it's only early and today's a new day, so Toma has a chance to turn his fortunes around. He goes to air out his futon and sees Index lying over the balcony. After giving her something to eat, they start to talk. Index tells Toma that she's on the run from a magic society who are after the knowledge she possesses. The name Index has quite a literal meaning, as she's the keeper of 103,000 grimoires stored in her brain. The grimoires contain all the magic in the world. Toma is struggling to follow along, as magic isn't something that people in Academy City are aware exists. So this is a lot to take in from a complete stranger. Adding to this doubt is Index's inability to prove anything she is claiming, since she can't use magic. But Toma does have his right hand, and the exact nature of it is a mystery to him, so he mentions it to Index. Unfortunately, she doesn't buy what he is selling either, so they're at a bit of an impasse. Until Index mentions her clothing. It's a walking church that can absorb any attack. They become frustrated with each other and decide that the best way to see who is telling the truth is have Toma touch the walking church. The church is shattered, meaning that there is at least some truth to both of their claims. But Toma is late for class and has to leave. He offers Index a key if she wants to stay, but she declines, not wanting Toma involved in her potentially life-threatening problems. Before she heads off, Toma breaks his phone and she explains to him that his right hand is probably cancelling out good luck and the grace of God by simply coming into contact with the air, so he's doomed to keep suffering bad luck. It's another clear example of the show leaning into Toma being an unfortunate person. Toma heads off to class and Index leaves. The scene between Index and Toma is an 8-minute-long dialogue-heavy conversation between two characters, but the effort is there to keep it fresh. The monotony is broken up with humour and the drama of breaking the walking church. It's not just two characters sitting down and talking at a table. There's an attempt to avoid the possibility of the conversation becoming bogged down. However, Toma does say something a little odd. He tells Index that if his right hand comes into contact with any unusual ability, he can cancel it out. Which is fine, but one of the examples he uses is the railgun. And according to the evidence of the show, this is wrong. The railgun requires a physical coin and Toma's ability can't cancel out physical attacks. If that wasn't bad enough, the railgun stats have it clocking an initial velocity of 10,030 meters per second. It's also noticeable that during Railgun T, when Makoto is mind-controlled, the railgun is never fired. Now, that hasn't happened yet. But even so, Toma has seen how the railgun works. He knows metal is involved, making this a strange statement. Although, Toma being wrong about this is the lesser of two evils. If he could stop the railgun, then he would be able to disperse physical objects, which would be a nightmare of a rabbit hole for the show to fill. He wouldn't be able to touch anything at all. People would vanish around him. He couldn't even wear a shirt. By the way, both subtitle versions have it as railgun, just FYI. The information Toma gives us about his right hand means we have combat mechanics. And oh boy, do I love combat mechanics. They are my bread and butter. Strategy in combat is one of my favorite subjects when watching anything. I'm all about the observation, planning, and execution of abilities. So with that in mind, Toma informs us that his ability is restricted to his right hand only. Restrictions are a good thing. You don't want a character who is too overpowered. Unless, of course, that's the point. Toma's ability being via touch and only with his right hand means that he doesn't have a ranged ability, at least for now. And as we have discussed, he can't block physical attacks. So those are some solid restrictions, but we'll have to wait and see how they're implemented into combat. Toma leaving for class is our switch back into the science side. As he is running to get there on time, he explains some basic information about Academy City. There are tons of schools and over 80% of the population are students. City's tech is said to be 20 years ahead of the rest of the world. At remedial class, Kamui gives her students a quiz with the catch that if they do poorly, they will have to stay and participate in a punishment game. Though regardless of performance, Toma's marks have been so poor that he will have to attend anyway. By the time he's finally able to leave, you can hear an announcement over what appears to be a citywide PA system, telling students they must head on home as it's nearly time for curfew. On the way back to his apartment, Makoto spots him and demands they fight, believing their previous encounter had no result. Toma isn't interested at all, barely paying attention and not even stopping to hear her out. His dismissal agitates Makoto and she discharges electricity. Once again, he is able to block it, but it disables some nearby robots and cell phones. The robots don't just serve as cleaners, they also have a security function. They spring to life and chase Makoto and Toma away because her lightning was an unauthorized use of her abilities. The first arc of Index is called the Index arc. Go figure. But this does mean that it primarily focuses on the magic side of the world. Despite that, there's still an effort to establish the science side, and showing us an average day in Academy City so we can learn how it works is a good way of doing this. The timing is also in favor of the decision. It's better to do this before the arc intensifies rather than to keep cutting back and forth between the two and risk stagnating the main focus. Makoto and Index are the clearest ways of determining which side of the world we're dealing with, and they've been well supported by both visual cues and changes in location, making it easier to follow. During the shift, we learn more details about the science side. First off, there is a curfew for the students, and that the power usage in the world seems to fall under similar guidelines to our real world. That being property damage and violence towards others is not acceptable. There's not much else I wanted to say about that for now, they're just footnotes to keep in mind. Another footnote is we've gotten our first glimpse of other characters in Toma's life, being Tsuchimikado, Agami, and Kamui. Toma returns home to discover Index lying outside his door and is rather casual about it, until he feels her blood on his hand. Now panicking, he wonders who or what did this to her, and Style confirms that magic was the cause. A small nitpick here is there's no blood on the wider shot when there really should be, considering how much she's bleeding. It's a very nitpick. This brings us to the end of episode 1, and it was pretty solid. A good introduction to our main characters and world, with an effective balancing between both magic and science. It even ends on a nice cliffhanger to get people invested in where the story will go. I'm now going to talk about my plans for the series. I intend to keep rolling on with the episodes. Depending on how much discussion each episode generates, there is a chance that some videos will cover more than just one at a time. So join me next time for our first life and death battle and talk all about stakes within a story. Until then, thank you for watching.